When a corrupt cop gets caught running a trafficking operation by a brave young boy, he thinks knocking the kid out will keep his dirty secret safe. But he's dead wrong. Against all odds, the boy makes a full recovery, setting in motion a chain of events that will expose the officer's lies and betrayal. This is a story of resilient survival and the pursuit of justice no one saw coming. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you stand against corruption and for justice, be sure to like and subscribe for more. The evening air was cool, and still the sky painted in hues of amber and violet as the sun dipped below the horizon. 14-year-old Sam Carter trudged along the familiar path, home, hands shoved deep in his hoodie pockets. The quiet walk was one of the few times he could think about his father, without anyone watching. Officer Mark Carter, his hero, had been killed in the line of duty 3 months ago. The loss left a hollow ache in Sam's chest, one that no amount of time seemed to ease. What made it worse was the lack of closure. His father's death was still an unsolved mystery. As Sam neared the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He paused, narrowing his gaze at the dim lights spilling through cracks in the building's worn exterior. It was strange. The warehouse had been empty for years. Curiosity prickled at him. Tugging his phone from his pocket, he crept closer, careful not to make a sound through a gap in the weathered planks. Sam's breath caught in his throat. Inside the scene was something out of a nightmare. Rows of people sat bound and gagged, their faces with fear. Crates stacked high bore markings he didn't recognize, while armed men barked orders, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. A gruff voice cut through the air. Load up the rest. We're moving out at dawn. No mistakes. Sam's heart raced as he fumbled to turn on his phone's camera. He snapped a few shaky photos, his hands trembling with adrenaline. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay long enough to record snippets of the men's conversation. The boss doesn't want any loose ends, one of them muttered. Then we'll make sure there aren't any, another replied with a chilling smirk. A loose board creaked beneath Sam's foot, and he froze. The men didn't seem to hear it, but the noise was enough to break his nerve. Quietly backing away, Sam turned and bolted into the woods, his heart hammering against his ribs. Branches clawed at his arms as he ran, his mind racing. He needed to find help. He needed someone to see the photos. After what felt like an eternity, he stumbled onto the main road and spotted a patrol car parked under a streetlight. Relief flooded him as he recognized the officer stepping out. Reed Barker, a well-respected figure in the community. Sam had seen him at school assemblies talking about safety and serving as a role model for kids. Officer Reed, Sam called, waving frantically. You have to help me. Reed's face creased with concern as Sam reached him, panting and clutching his phone. Sam, what's going on? There's something at the warehouse. People tied up, drugs, guns. I took photos, Sam said in a rush, thrusting his phone towards Reed. You have to do something. Reed took the phone, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through the images. For a moment, Sam felt like he could finally breathe. But then Reed's demeanor shifted, his jaw tightened, and a cold, calculating look flickered in his eyes. You've done the right thing, Sam, Reed said, his voice calm but hollow. I'll handle it from here. Sam frowned, sensing something was off. Wait, I can. Before he could finish, pain exploded at the back of his head. The world spun as Sam crumpled to the ground, darkness swallowing him whole. When Sam stirred briefly, he was lying on damp earth. His vision swam, but he caught glimpses of a man dragging him into a ditch. Gravel scraped his cheek as he was rolled onto his side. The man crouched beside him, muttering under his breath, should have kept your nose out of it, kid, he said, patting Sam's pockets until he found the phone. The man smashed it against a rock, the shattering glass echoing in the still night. Satisfied, he straightened, leaving Sam crumpled in the ditch, and disappeared into the distance. The next morning, the world stirred to life, with the sound of birds chirping and joggers padding along their routes. A middle-aged man out for his daily run skidded to a halt when he spotted a figure lying motionless near the roadside. Oh my God, he whispered, pulling out his phone to call 911. Paramedics arrived quickly, loading the unconscious boy onto a stretcher and rushing him to the hospital. Laura Carter was notified within the hour. When she arrived, her body caught at the sight of her son, pale and still hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically. What happened to my boy? She demanded, tears streaming down her face. Who did this to him? Reed was among the officers. Who? responded to the scene, his face carefully schooled into concern. "Weck investigate every lead, Mrs. Carter," he said solemnly. "It looks like a mugging. We'll find the person responsible." As Laura clung to her son's hand and willing him to wake up, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The steady hum of hospital machines was the only sound filling the sterile room. As Laura Carter sat by her son's bedside, she clutched Sam's hand, her knuckles white, as though her grip alone could pull him back from the brink. Her mind swirled with fear and anger. She had already lost her husband, Mark, in the line of duty. Now the thought of losing Sam felt like a cruel twist of fate. The doctors assured Laura that Sam was stable, but couldn't predict when or if he would wake up. The uncertainty gripped her. But Laura knew one thing for sure: someone had hurt her son, and she wasn't going to rest until she found out who. The news of Sam's attack spread quickly through their small community. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers dropped off casseroles, cards, and flowers at the hospital. Laura appreciated their kindness, but it felt hollow. None of it could answer the burning questions in her mind: who had done this, and why? At the center of the town's concern was Officer Reed Barker, a fixture in the community and a familiar face at town events. He arrived at the hospital the next morning, his uniform pressed and his demeanor somber. Standing in front of reporters and townsfolk, he assured everyone that the police were working tirelessly to investigate the attack. This was likely an isolated incident, Reed said, his voice calm and steady. "A random mugging gone wrong. We'll do everything in our power to bring the perpetrator to justice." Laura watched the press conference from a chair near Sam's room, her heart tightening with every word. Reed's concern seemed genuine, but something about his tone felt rehearsed, calculated. She clenched her fists, wondering if her growing unease was simply a product of her grief, or if it was something more. Laura began piecing together what little she knew. Sam had left his friend's house just after sunset. He should have been home within 20 minutes, but hours had passed before he was found unconscious in that ditch. Where had he been during that time? What had he seen? Determined to find answers, Laura started visiting the places Sam might have passed that night. The corner store clerk remembered seeing Sam, but nothing unusual. A jogger recalled a patrol car near the ditch, but couldn't provide any details. When Laura asked about the warehouse, people grew quiet, their eyes darting away. One older man whispered, "You don't want to go poking around there, Mrs. Carter. It's bad news." Laura pressed him, but he shook his head and walked away, leaving her feeling more frustrated than ever. Meanwhile, Reed maintained his image as the town's protector. He stopped by the hospital, regularly checking in on Laura and Sam. To everyone else, his presence was reassuring, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He seemed too composed, too detached. When he talked about the investigation behind the scenes, Reed worked furiously to cover his tracks. The night after Sam's attack, he and his men emptied the warehouse, moving every trace of the trafficking operation. The captives were relocated and the drugs were transported to another state. By morning, the building was empty, its walls silent witnesses to what had occurred. Reed also made sure to eliminate any loose ends. He visited the jogger who had reported Sam, subtly reminding him of how dangerous it could be to talk too much. At the same time, he monitored Laura's movements, knowing that her determination could jeopardize everything if she uncovered the truth. When Laura returned to the hospital one evening, she found Reed sitting in the waiting room, chatting with the nurse. He greeted her with a warm smile that made her skin crawl. "How's Sam doing today?" he asked, his voice laced with practiced sympathy. "Same as before," Laura replied curtly, not meeting his eyes. "No change." Reed nodded. "We're doing everything we can to find who did this. I promise you." Laura wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but she bit her tongue. If there was even a shred of truth to her suspicion, confronting him directly would be dangerous. Instead, she channeled her frustration into action. She returned to the warehouse, hoping to find something, anything that might explain why Sam had been there. But when she arrived, the place was eerily clean. The crates, the captives, the lights all gone. The air was thick with the smell of bleach, as though someone had scrubbed away every trace of what had happened. Her heart sank. Whoever had done this knew how to cover their tracks. Laura began sharing her concerns with people in town, but the responses were mixed. Some believed her, offering quiet support, and murmured encouragement. Others dismissed her fears as the ramblings of a grieving mother, and then there were those who outright avoided her, their nervous glances suggesting they knew more than they were willing to admit. Even the police seemed dismissive. When Laura asked Officer Daniels Reed's juror about the warehouse, he shrugged uncomfortably. "It's just an empty building, Mrs. Carter. We've checked it out. There's nothing there now," Laura snapped. "But what about before?" Daniels hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "I really don't know what you're talking about," he said before walking away. Quickly that night, Laura sat by Sam's bedside, staring at his pale face and the bandage on his head. Her mind replayed Reed's words, his calm demeanor, and the jogger's comment about a patrol car. The pieces didn't fit, but her gut told her she was onto something. "I'll find out what happened to you, Sam," she whispered, brushing his hair back gently. "I'll find out who did this." Sam's fingers twitched slightly in response, the faintest glimmer of hope in another otherwise bleak moment. Laura took it as a sign, her resolve hardening. "Do you think Reed was the one who killed Sam's father? Share your thoughts in the comments. Will Sam ever wake up? And will Officer Reed be brought to justice? Give this video a like, and stay tuned to find out." The hospital corridors were quiet, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow on the empty halls. It was nearly midnight, and most of the staff had either gone home or settled into their night shifts. Sam lay motionless in his bed, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, the machines peeping softly in the background. Laura sat in the corner of the room, her head resting against the back of the chair. The past week had taken a toll on her. Sleep came in fits and starts, and she often jolted awake, haunted by dreams of losing Sam. Tonight, though, her exhaustion got the better of her and her eyes fluttered shut. Two figures moved silently through the hospital's dimly lit parking lot, their faces obscured by hooded sweatshirts. They bypassed the main entrance, instead slipping in through a side door left ajar by a distracted staff member earlier in the evening. Inside, their steps were calculated and deliberate, each man carrying the weight of an unspoken mission. One of the men, stocky with a thick beard, glanced at the other. "We do this clean, no noise," he whispered. His partner, lean and wiry, nodded, gripping the syringe tightly. In his gloved hand, they reached the elevator and waited, the hum of the machinery the only sound in the stillness. When the door slid open, they stepped inside, their expressions cold and resolute. Laura stirred in her chair, a distant noise pulling her from the fringes of sleep. She blinked, groggy, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the room. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Sam was still, the machines hummed, and the hallway outside was quiet. But then she heard it again, the faintest creak, as though someone was pushing a door open ever so carefully. Her pulse quickened as she stood, her gaze darting toward the door. It was ajar just slightly, and a shadow flickered across the floor. Laura's instincts kicked in, and she hurried to Sam's bedside, her body shielding his as she scanned the room for anything she could use as a weapon. The door opened fully, and the two men entered. Their faces were partially hidden, but the intent in their eyes was unmistakable. Laura's voice trembled as she shouted, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The stocky man hesitated for a split second before lunging toward her. Laura screamed, backing away. As she fumbled for the nurse's call button, the wiry man moved toward Sam, raising the syringe. At that moment, the door burst open, and a nurse rushed in. Alerted by Laura's shouts, the men froze, their plan unraveling. The stocky man cursed under his breath, grabbing his partner's arm. "We're blown, let's go." The two bolted out of the room, knocking over a tray of medical supplies in their haste. Laura darted after them, but the nurse grabbed her arm. They could be armed by the time hospital security arrived. The men were gone, disappearing into the night, as though they had never been there. Laura collapsed into a chair, trembling. Her eyes darted toward Sam, still unconscious but unharmed, and tears streamed down her face. "They were going to kill him," she whispered. The police arrived within an hour, led by none other than Officer Reed Barker. He listened to Laura's account with a practiced calm, nodding at all the right moments, but never letting his expression betray anything more than professional concern. "This sounds like a misunderstanding," Reed said. "Finally, could have been junkies looking for drugs. A hospital isn't exactly a fortress." "A misunderstanding," Laura snapped, her voice rising. "They had a syringe. They were trying to kill him." Reed raised his hands in a pleading gesture. "We'll look into it, Mrs. Carter. I'll personally make sure this incident is investigated thoroughly." Laura's hands clenched into fists. She didn't believe him, not for a Second, that there was no one else to turn to that night. Unable to sleep, Laura made a desperate phone call to someone she hoped could help Mayor Robert Langston. He had been a friend of Mark's, speaking highly of him during the funeral service, and she prayed he would listen. "Robert, it's Laura Carter." She began, her voice trembling. "Something happened tonight. Someone tried to kill Sam in the hospital." "Laura, calm down," Langston replied, his tone serious. "What do you mean? Who would do that?" "I don't know," Laura said. "But the police read he's not taking it seriously. I'm telling you, something bigger is going on, and they're trying to cover it up." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Laura, if what you're saying is true, we can't take any chances. I'll contact the FBI. They'll step in and make sure this is handled properly." Laura exhaled, relief flooding her. "Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much." Within 24 hours, Special Agent Hannah Pierce was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator known for her relentless pursuit of justice. Pierce wasted no time taking charge. "Mrs. Carter," she said, extending a hand to Laura at the hospital, "I'm here to ensure your son is safe and to find out who's behind this." Laura felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so scared." Pierce nodded. "You have every right to be, but my team is already on it. From this point forward, no one gets in or out of this room without clearance." Though reassured by the FBI's involvement, Laura couldn't shake her paranoia. Every shadow in the hospital hallway felt menacing, every passing stranger a potential threat. Agent Pierce's team stationed themselves near Sam's room, their presence a small comfort, but not enough to ease Laura's growing anxiety. Meanwhile, Pierce began piecing together the fragments of information. The attempted attack on Sam raised questions about why he had been targeted in the first place. "There's more to this than a random mugging," Pierce told her team. "Someone wants this kid silenced." That night, Laura stayed awake by Sam's side, clutching his hand as she kept watch over him. The memory of the intruders haunted her, their cold eyes and purposeful movements replaying in her mind. She couldn't lose Sam, not after Mark. As the clock ticked past midnight, Laura whispered to her unconscious son, "You're going to be okay, Sam. I promise they won't get to you again." Sam didn't stir, but Laura thought she felt the faintest pressure of his fingers against hers. It was enough to give of her hope, even in the midst of her fear. 2 weeks had passed since Sam Carter was found unconscious in a ditch. The hospital room had become a second home for Laura, who stayed by her son's bedside. Every waking hour, machines beeped rhythmically, their monotonous sound both a comfort and a reminder of Sam's fragile state. Each passing day without progress chipped away at Laura's resolve, but she refused to leave him. She had already lost her husband. Losing Sam was unthinkable. Then one quiet morning, a small movement broke the monotony. Sam's fingers twitched. At first, Laura thought she imagined it, but then his eyelids fluttered. She shot up from her chair, gripping his hand tightly. "Sam," her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with hope. Sam's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and heavy with exhaustion. "Mom," he coaxed, his voice weak, but unmistakable. Tears spilled down Laura's cheeks as she leaned closer. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Relief poured through her, but her joy was short-lived. Sam's brows furrowed, his expression darkening. "It was Officer Reed." Laura froze, her breath catching in her throat. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice shaking. "It was Reed," Sam repeated, his voice stronger this time. "I tried to tell him about the warehouse. The people tied up the drugs. He hit me, took my phone, and left me in a ditch." Laura's world tilted. Officer Reed Barker, the man leading the investigation, the man she had trusted, was the one who had hurt her son. "Are you sure, Sam?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Sam nodded weakly. "He's part of it, Mom. He's working with them." By the time Agent Hannah Pierce arrived, Sam had recounted the entire story. Pierce listened intently, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. "Sam, what you've told us is crucial," she said, her voice steady. "But we need to be very careful. If Reed finds out you're awake and talking, he might try to silence you again." Laura's grip on Sam's hand tightened. "You can't let that happen. You promised to protect him." "I will," Pierce assured her. "I'm stationing agents outside this room. No one gets in or out without my team's approval. But we need to keep Sam's revelation a secret while we build our case." Laura hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, just keep him safe." As Sam began his recovery, his memories trickled back slowly. One evening, while the machines hummed softly around them, He turned to his mother. Mom, do you remember how Dad was acting before he died? Laura's heart clenched at the mention of Mark. What do you mean? Sweetheart, Sam frowned, struggling to find the right words. He was different, quiet, like he was worried about something. Do you think it had anything to do with Reed? Laura's stomach churned. She had tried not to think about Mark's death, about the questions that lingered, but now the pieces were starting to fit together. I don't know, Sam, she admitted, her voice trembling. But we're going to find out. As Sam rested, Pierce pored over records, focusing on Mark Carter's last cases. What she found was damning: a string of arrests that had been quietly dismissed due to lack of evidence, all tied to Reed's precinct. One name stood out: Mark Carter. Pierce dug deeper, uncovering a case file Mark had been working on shortly before his death. The file wasn't part of any official investigation, but it hinted at something big, a connection to a trafficking ring operating in the area. Laura sat beside Sam, her hand resting on his. Her mind raced as she replayed everything Pierce had told her. If Mark had been on to Reed, his death wasn't just a tragedy, it was murder. Mom, Sam's voice broke through her thoughts. She looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. Yes, sweetheart, I'm scared, he admitted, his voice small. What if they come back? Laura leaned down, pressing a kiss to his forehead. They won't, she promised, her voice fierce. I won't let anyone hurt you, not ever again. Sam's lips trembled, but he nodded. Okay. Reed's visits to the hospital became less frequent, but when he did show up, his demeanor was tense. Laura watched him carefully, her suspicions growing with each interaction. She couldn't help but notice how his eyes darted nervously around the room, how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Sam, still weak but regaining his strength, had overheard Laura mention Reed's name to Agent Pierce. Though he longed to confront the man who had betrayed him, Pierce had warned him to remain silent until they had an airtight case. When Reed entered the room, Sam would keep his eyes closed and his breathing steady, pretending to remain unconscious. It took every ounce of self-control for Sam to lie still. When Reed approached his bed, the man's voice sent chills down his spine. Poor kid, Reed muttered, his tone a mockery of sympathy. It's a shame the world's so dangerous these days. Sam's fists clenched under the blanket, his nails digging into his palms as he fought the urge to open his eyes and shout the truth. He wanted to scream, to tell his mom, the FBI, anyone, that this man was a monster. But he remembered Pierce's advice: if he knows you're awake, you're not safe. One evening after Reed left the room, Laura approached Agent Pierce in the hallway. Do you think he knows? She whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Pierce's expression was grim. It's possible, but Sam's doing the right thing by pretending. Reed won't act unless he feels cornered. When we make our move, it'll be airtight inside the room. Sam opened his eyes just enough to glance at the door. Reed had walked through. His heart raced, but he stayed silent, determined to play his part in taking Reed down. The shift in the investigation was immediate. Once Agent Hannah Pierce formally took charge, the FBI wasted no time establishing a temporary field office where agents worked tirelessly to sift through evidence, compile leads, and plan their next moves. The atmosphere was tense but purposeful, a sharp contrast to the inertia that had plagued the local police as the FBI intensified its surveillance on Officer Reed Barker. The scale of his corruption came into focus. Phone records linked him to known traffickers. Bank accounts showed suspicious deposits, and surveillance footage captured him meeting with members of the syndicate. Reed wasn't just complicit, he was integral to the operation. Pierce's second-in-command, Agent Daniels, approached her with a thick folder. It's all here: payments for shell companies, calls to syndicate members, and even footage of him near the first warehouse. Before it was cleared out, Pierce scanned the file, her expression hardening. This guy's been working both sides for years. Let's make sure we don't give him any warning. As the investigation unfolded, a chilling link emerged between Reed and the death of Mark Carter. Pierce's team discovered that Mark had been investigating the syndicate independently before his murder. His personal notes, recovered from old case files, detailed his suspicions about Reed's involvement. One entry stood out: Reed knows he's nervous. I think I'm getting too close. Pierce shared the revelation with Laura during a quiet moment at the hospital. Your husband wasn't just killed in the line of duty, she said carefully. He was silenced. Laura's face went pale as she clutched the arms of her chair. Mark always said something big was happening. He couldn't tell me much. He said it was safer if I didn't know. Pierce nodded solemnly. Mark was a brave man. He got too close to the truth, and they made sure he couldn't expose them using Sam's descriptions. And Reed's surveillance data, the FBI pinpointed the syndicate's new base of operations, a larger warehouse on the outskirts of a neighboring city. "This is it," Pierce announced during a briefing with her team. "This is their new hub. Reed's been seen making multiple trips to this location. We hit them here, and we take down the entire operation." The plan was clear but dangerous: a coordinated raid to dismantle the operation, rescue the captives, and apprehend everyone involved, including Reed. The FBI's tactical teams worked late into the night, rehearsing their entry strategies and reviewing blueprints of the warehouse. Pierce emphasized the need for precision. "We can't afford mistakes," she told the assembled team. "If they get even a hint we're coming, they'll vanish." Meanwhile, Laura stayed with Sam at a secure location arranged by the FBI. The separation from the action was agonizing, but she understood the stakes. Sam spent the evening restlessly sketching his memories of the warehouse, trying to provide every detail he could remember. "You're doing great," Laura told him, brushing a hand through his hair. "Your dad would be so proud of you." Sam nodded, his jaw set. "They have to stop him, Mom, for Dad." "They will," Laura promised, her voice steady despite her fear. "They will." The air was thick with tension as the FBI team assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, finalizing preparations for the raid on the warehouse. Agent Hannah Pierce stood at the front, her voice steady as she briefed the team. "This is a high-stakes operation. We have confirmed captives inside, weapons, drugs, and potentially dangerous individuals. Our priority is the safety of the hostages and securing enough evidence to dismantle this syndicate." As the team rolled out in unmarked vans, Pierce glanced at her watch. The element of surprise was critical. They couldn't afford to fail. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a hulking shadow against the faint glow of the approaching dawn. Tactical teams moved into position, their boots silent on the gravel. Pierce gave the signal, and within moments, the perimeter was breached. The sound of doors being rammed open echoed through the stillness, followed by shouts of FBI. Everyone on the ground inside. Chaos erupted. The criminals scrambled to escape, some reaching for weapons, while others ran for cover. The agents moved swiftly, clearing each section of the warehouse with precision. Captives huddled in fear, their hands bound and their faces pale. Pierce herself oversaw the rescue, cutting restraints and helping the captives to safety. "Get them out," she barked to her team. "Medics are standing by." As the captives were escorted outside, one young girl, no older than 10, clung to an agent's arm. She sobbed as she recounted what she'd seen. "They were going to sell us," she choked out. "They said they'd make us disappear." Pierce knelt beside her, her voice gentle but firm. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." In one corner of the warehouse, agents uncovered crates of drugs, illegal firearms, and stacks of cash. Among the haul were incriminating documents, ledgers detailing transactions, shipping schedules, and coded communications. Pierce's team meticulously documented every piece of evidence. "This is enough to bury them," Agent Daniel said, flipping through one of the ledgers. But just as the team began securing the area, a shout came over the radio. "We've got movement." Officer Reed spotted heading south. Pierce's heart sank. "Seal the exits," she ordered. But it was too late. Reed, knowing the layout of the warehouse better than anyone, had slipped through a side exit during the commotion outside. Tire tracks in the dirt told the story. Reed had escaped in a vehicle parked nearby. As the operation wound down, the captives were loaded into ambulances and interviewed by agents. The young girl who had spoken to Pierce earlier provided a detailed account of her ordeal. "I saw him," she said, her small hands trembling. "The man you're looking for, he was giving orders. He said no one would ever find us." Her testimony, combined with Sam's account and the recovered evidence, strengthened the case against Reed and the syndicate. But Pierce couldn't shake the frustration of letting Reed slip through their fingers. Back at the FBI field office, Pierce debriefed her team. "We've dealt a major blow to their operation, but this isn't over. Reed's on the run, and we can't let him disappear." She turned to Agent Daniels. "Double the surveillance on his known associates. He's desperate now, and desperate people make mistakes." The walls were closing in on Officer Reed, with the FBI dismantling his operation and his associates either arrested or scattered. Reed knew his time was running out, but he wasn't ready to go down quietly. Desperation pushed him to make one final reckless move. Reed's battered truck rumbled down a dirt road toward a secluded cabin. Deep in the woods beside him sat a young girl, trembling and silent, her hands bound. She was one of the captives from the warehouse raid. Someone Reed had planned to profit from before the FBI intervened. Now she was his insurance policy. You stay quiet, he growled, glancing at her briefly. They don't care about you, but they'll do anything to stop me. Reed's plan was simple: use the girl as leverage to negotiate his escape. He had stashed enough cash and fake IDs to flee the state, but he needed time to make it happen. Time the FBI wasn't likely to give him back. At the FBI's field office, Agent Hannah Pierce pored over surveillance footage and intercepted communications. He's desperate, she said to her team. Desperate people make mistakes, but they're also dangerous. Pierce's phone buzzed, and an agent's voice came through. We've tracked Reed's truck to a cabin in Pinewood Forest. Satellite images confirm it's isolated, no backup for miles. Pierce nodded grimly. What else? There's a heat signature indicating multiple occupants, the agent added. We think he's taken a hostage. Pierce felt a pang of dread, but kept her voice steady. We move in fast and precise, no room for error. The FBI tactical team arrived at the cabin under the cover of darkness. Pierce stood at the forefront, her earpiece crackling with updates from her team. The cabin was quiet, the only light coming from a single window. Pierce stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. Reed Barker, this is the FBI. We know you're in there. Let the girl go, and we can talk inside. Reed paced like a caged animal, his gun in hand. The young girl sat trembling on a tattered couch, tears streaming down her face. Reed barked back, you don't call the shots, Pierce. I do. You come any closer and she's done. Pierce held her ground, her voice steady. Hurting her won't help you, Reed. We both know this ends one way. Let her go, and we'll listen to what you have to say. Reed hesitated, his grip on the gun tightening. You think you've won. You have no idea what you're up against. As the standoff dragged on, Reed's patience began to fray.